I'm the chair of the Hong Kong Jewish Historical Society. And this is our third installment of our In the Present Tense series, The Next Gen. And instead of me talking, because you're not here to hear me, I'm going to pass it over to Lilith Marcus, and she will introduce the panelists and tell you what we're going to talk about this evening.
Hi everyone. I'm not going to stand up because this mic, I actually don't have a pocket. Women's clothing can be really challenging for these mic packs. Thank you all for coming tonight. We have four panelists here, and what's been fantastic is I knew about this panel a few months ago, which means that we had enough time I've been able to meet with each panelist one-on-one, learn a little bit about them, and there's so much to go over tonight that I'm really looking forward to it. So let me just give some short introductions, although I think most of you know each other. Philippe Bera was born and raised in Hong Kong and attended the German-Swiss International School. His family moved to China in the late 1910s. His grandmother grew up in Harbin, and his father was born in Shanghai. They moved their business to Hong Kong in the 1950s, and today they operate a distribution business for wine in Hong Kong and Macau, which also sells to 10 countries globally. Jonathan Zeman's family has been in Hong Kong for more than 45 years. The Zeman family founded Long Pai Fung here in Hong Kong. The LKF Group is a family business, Jonathan serving as CEO and his father Alan as chairman. The group is involved in residential and commercial property development, property asset management, hospitality and food and beverage businesses, covering Hong Kong, mainland China, and Thailand. Dan Green is a fourth generation Hong Konger. His great-grandfather moved here in the late 1800s. He, his father, and grandfather were all bar mitzvahed at Uncle Leah, and he is the third generation to run his family's business. And that leaves us with Joe Diestel. His family came to Shanghai via what was then Palestine and Constantinople. A long voyage led to a quick marriage and a job in the Astor House. Compelled to leave Shanghai in 1952, a quick pit stop in Canada, and then a return to Hong Kong in 1959. He is a third generation China-born Jew and loves scrapbooking. See, none of you submitted hobbies in that section. So what I'd like to do is, ostensibly, this panel is about the past, the present, and the future of Jewish life here in Hong Kong. So I thought I'd start, rather than by calling on anyone in particular, can I get a show of hands? Of the four of you, how many of you speak at least conversational Cantonese? And how many of you... come on, conversations. All right, and then how many of you have children? Show of hands. How many of your children speak Cantonese? All right, so Jonathan, since you raised your hand, I'm going to start with you. One thing that came up with all of you individually was that you think there's been a change from maybe Jewish people having to be Hong Kongers, having to speak the language, not having a big community here in Hong Kong, and that's changed over time. Do you think that language has anything to do with that?
But language in Hong Kong, also in pre-1997 Hong Kong, it's a big, complex topic. I myself, luckily my mother, when I was 8 years old, my mother said you should learn Cantonese. So she sent me to after-school classes at the Baptist College at the time. And so that gave me a good basis, and from there I learned. But otherwise, most of my peers, besides Joe, who I just found out, speaks conversational Cantonese. Most of my peers don't speak Cantonese. So, myself, I married my wife Melinda, who is half Hong Kong Chinese. So she happens to speak Cantonese at home with her mother, and from there my kids learn Chinese. We thought that's also important for the kids to have a good basis in Chinese, since Hong Kong, post-1997, is becoming more Chinese. It is a Chinese city, an international Chinese city, but still that Chinese language basis is important just going forward. I expect that my kids will have to be able to write an email in Chinese at some point in their career. So we thought it's important that they learn Cantonese, conversational Cantonese, but then written and spoken Mandarin.
Yeah, anyone else? What languages did you want your children to be able to speak?
So I think your question should have been how many of us speak Mandarin.
Okay.
Because so my parents thought, at young age, at the age of 7, 8, that I would have to have Mandarin class at home. So I had that for 3 times a week until I was 15, and that's proven quite useful, especially today. So that's been my kind of segue to Chinese language, but it's basically Mandarin, not Cantonese.
We can have a mic for this side if one of you wants one. Dan?
I mean, I think my parents tried to have me speak Cantonese at a young age, but I sort of was not a very good student. And actually, we had growing up, we had a slightly, let's say, reserved view of what Hong Kong would be like in the long term, because my family had been uprooted from China pretty unceremoniously and basically had all their possessions stripped from them. And so there was always a feeling, what if Hong Kong doesn't have a bright future, although we were optimistic. And so I left and went away to school when I was 13. I spent my high school in the UK, so whatever Chinese I'd learned, I quickly forgot, and then lived in the States and only came back to Hong Kong in 2002 when there was a sort of need for me to come and get involved in the family company. So I'm trying to do a better job with my kids who learn Mandarin, and they have extra classes, and I try to be quite strict there. And I think they're doing a pretty good job. I agree with Phil, if you are going to be committed to Hong Kong, obviously language is going to be a huge advantage.
Joe?
Nothing really to add. I think they've pretty much covered it. The only thing that maybe didn't touch on is when we were children, at least, the Cantonese I learned was very street, very colloquial. That was from playing with kids in the block and from shop vendors and that type of thing. For international school attendees, there was a common thread from everybody that their parents pushed them to do extra, whether it was Baptist college, whether it was at home. They tried to push me, but of course, I'm not really a very good student. All that stuff, because the education structure amongst the broader community was still very focused on, very bubble-like, very focused on, you're here for a few years, then the kids have to go back to wherever they're from, whether it was France, UK, or mainly UK at the time, the States, and fit straight into that curriculum. And what the hell is that curriculum if you spend all your time learning Cantonese or Mandarin? Which is why I think we're fortunate today that internationally it's accepted that learning Chinese when you're abroad or when you're living in a place, it's a must. Whether it's Mandarin or Cantonese, it doesn't matter, you have to do it. People are shocked if you said you weren't taught Chinese in school when you were a kid, whereas today it's what, you're not taught enough Chinese when you're in school as a kid.
Yeah, so I thought this was on, but maybe not. So Joe, you mentioned the bubble concept a little bit. Can you tell me exactly what you mean by that?
I think anybody, and there's quite a lot of people in this room who've been here for a long time as well. I think everybody here pretty much has an idea what the bubble was. The bubble was, we grew up here, some of us had family businesses, and some of us family businesses were very integrated into Hong Kong, into the local culture. There was other people who Hong Kong really was a posting. It wasn't a home. It was a place where they either made their bones. Some people came out and thought only 2 years. The name of my book on Hong Kong will be Only 2 Years. And then, Alan, 2 years? Yeah, 2 years. And that's it. So because of that, there was like an isolationist bubble where people didn't get too integrated because they didn't think necessarily that they were going to be here all that long. But then 2 years stretched to 5 and 10, and habits stay.
And so, I've heard that concept quite a lot from, you guys have families who are here, this is your long-term home. When I moved here, I was going to move here for 2 years. So in order to have a living and thriving and growing Jewish community, right, you want people to stay, right? So how do we address the issue? Why do people think so often of Hong Kong as, this is just a place where I'm going to stay for a while?
I think we represent different part of the community, and that's sort of what's more interesting, is we aren't transient people. My grandmother's best friend was Joe's grandmother in Shanghai, right? We're like a different type of history. We're the Hong Kong history of Jews. And so, we were never transient, and that's where we fit into like this strange situation where the Jewish community was our community. It was much smaller. It wasn't well funded. It was all a bit run down, and but it was really a small group of committed families who kind of grew up together, and it was a very different community. Now we've got resources, and we attract a much wider sort of membership because we've got JCC and a wonderful synagogue. It was very different there, and it was I would say a much more intimate and connected smaller community at the time.
Yeah, just to add to that, Hong Kong, again, is complex. Before 1997, even the Chinese population in Hong Kong, a lot of them were refugees from north of the border, they were treating Hong Kong as a transient place, expecting to go either back home, once things changed politically, or go to Canada or somewhere overseas. So within the local population, you had that mentality already. Then you had the expat population that had this transient mentality. So now, post-1997, Hong Kong's changed a lot, and it's definitely a very good place to live. It's an expensive place to live, so if you don't have the right job opportunities or your own business, you can't really hang out for long, trying to explore things. In other places like New York or London, you could move out to somewhere that's less expensive, wait it out, and figure things out from there. In Hong Kong, you don't have that option, so you really have to have your career together in order to make this a long-term home. It's just the fact of living here.
I guess the other major difference is as generations stay in Hong Kong, they get a little bit more locked into place. When you look at our parents, most of them, even though they may have been born in Asia, they still were educated outside Asia. Whereas for us, going to school here, having our bar mitzvah here, when I left Hong Kong, the intention was always to come back. I mean, there was no other, not choice, but there was no other game plan in my head. I left at 18, went to university. Even when I left university, the first thing I did was apply for a job in Asia. I didn't get the job, but that was always the game plan. And I think as generations stay in Hong Kong, they get more implanted into, it's like roots into the community, and all the things around that.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. University education is actually a big thing for whether or not someone stays in Hong Kong. So typically, Jewish community kids, they end up going to university overseas. They don't choose Hong Kong or mainland China for university. And so what happens is they build a life over there. Maybe they meet a partner, and that partner doesn't want to move to Hong Kong, or they find a job overseas. So that definitely, I think, is an important factor if we had our own kind of university for the community.
Ooh, next project.
Then maybe it would be different.
And one other point, which is that Asia has moved on in the last 100 years. So there's a lot more available to us. Point of university, I mean, we were talking with my wife, we only have a 3 and 5-year-old child, but who says they won't go to university in Asia? That was not an option 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Beijing, great universities. Singapore, great universities. Hong Kong, great universities. So that, as I said, the roots are growing deeper in this part of the world.
So it's different for you guys because you grew up here, but for those of us who moved from elsewhere, I'm curious if anyone else had this experience. I told people I was moving to Hong Kong, and they were like, do they have Jews there? So I think that in our community, we often think of certain, it's Israel, it's New York City, there are certain loci of the Jewish community. But since coming here, I haven't found that to be the case at all. But when you're interfacing with people outside of Hong Kong or outside of Asia, how do you talk to them about Jewish life here? How do you describe it? Joe laughs, he gets the mic.
Well, I was going to tell a story a little along with that about my soon-to-be mother-in-law at the time. who used to take me walking, and if any of you know Montreal, she used to take me down Green Avenue. Green Avenue shopping place in Montreal, and she used to have me hold her shopping for her and follow behind, and she would bump into people, and she would ultimately say, they'd say, what's new? She says, my daughter's engaged. And they say, oh, wonderful, who is he? And she would say, he's from Hong Kong. And they would go, oh. And then she would turn and say, and here he is. All right, so that note aside, I might not be the most...
Was it because they met you, or?
Because they met me, yes, that's it. So what's the point? How do you relate to it? You know, sometimes people abroad, or sometimes people back home, are very insular looking in their community. I feel that growing up here in Hong Kong, nothing shocks us because anything is possible, right? Not only that, in Hong Kong, creativity, positivity, and achievement is praised. So I think sometimes when you're in places like, why would anyone want to leave Montreal? Why would anyone want to leave New York? Oh, things are wonderful here in Manchester. Why are you going there? Why would you go? And the obvious facts that our community, throughout its entire history, is based on, we're the diaspora, we spread. So I often find it's quite narrow-minded when people say, oh, there's Jews in Hong Kong? Well, yes, there's Jews everywhere. And I think part of the attraction in Hong Kong, and will be Hong Kong in the future, is the fact that it attracts like-minded people. People who are open to new things, people who are open to being positive and building things.
Dan, I saw some nods.
No, I think most people understand now that there's Jews everywhere. It's not a strange thing. People don't say, oh, why, there are Jews in Hong Kong. People don't do that anymore. You know, probably, you know, a few generations ago, people were less international, but now everyone realizes, you know, there's Jews everywhere. We contribute to societies and all over the world. I think what's more interesting is to give them a bit of the historical context, which I usually do, because I think we've got a very rich history you can be quite proud of. And actually the Jewish business community had such an enormous influence all over Asia. You know, you go to Mumbai and see the gateway to India, you know, which was donated by the Sassoon family, who also had our synagogue and synagogues all over Asia. I think that to me is what I usually try, if they've got the patience, is I usually try and explain to them, because we've got quite a lot of history to be proud of, and Jewish communities have contributed extensively all over Asia.
And I also always tell people our synagogue was built in 1902, which is pretty amazing. Still standing, still being used, still has a minyan every day, normally. Please make sure you go to the minyan if you don't. So that's always very, very amazing for people to know. And then, it used to be difficult to explain to people, but now they get it, I think. So. It's nice to be able to tell people about how great the community is here. Like Joe said, it's very international. People are open-minded. Doesn't matter if you're religious, not so religious, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, American, South African, whatever. Everyone's mixed up and joining each other for Shabbat dinners and things like that. I always tell people that it's one of the most vibrant Jewish places to live, despite not knowing that. Despite people not expecting that.
I think, Dan and I, we've been to quite a few conferences globally, charitable conferences, United Israel, Peel, and we meet people all the time from all walks of life. I think the one thing that I generally respond to, the question is always, how's Hong Kong, how's the community? And I'm as optimistic talking about Hong Kong as I am talking about the community, the Jewish community in Hong Kong. I think both for us go hand in hand. It's one and the same. The other thing is that I think what really strikes people is how the broader community can interact with the Jewish community in Hong Kong. People are always in awe that there is that kind of that bridge that we cross all the time, daily life, with the locals. And there's no very little anti-Semitism compared to the rest of the world. And I think that's, when we talk about that to these people around the world, their eyes light up. It's like, that's possible? And I think that really is what resonates in their minds, and what we can do to really promote Asia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and the Jewish communities in these cities.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Phil, because honestly, when I moved here, that was something that I didn't know much about. I didn't know Asia very well, but in the US and in other parts of the world, I had experienced some very concerning anti-Semitism, some indirectly and some indirectly at me. And I would say that personally, that has been less of an issue since I moved to this part of the world. Is that something that's been pretty constant here in Hong Kong and in China, or have you noticed a change?
I mean, I've obviously lived a few years less than these gents, but at least, sorry guys. But in my shorter time, it's always been the same, very constant. I think there hasn't been that much more, at least in my time. I saw so many disturbing things in Europe when I was there for university, even in Switzerland. I mean, sometimes quite shocking. Here we have a Hong Kong Holocaust Intolerance Center, which again it's amazing that such a small community can build something so relevant in society that again walks over the bridge to the local community and helps them as well. I think it's been quite constant, at least in my life.
I think also it's worth remembering that China was a safe haven for Jews, and that's the reason our family went to China, because it was safe, it was protecting, there was a protective environment for Jews to basically flourish. And although people disagree with Chinese politics, and it's easy to disagree with Chinese politics, they've never had issues with Jews. And I don't think there's many other countries in the world that we can say that's the case. So I think it's pretty important to remember we've been very welcome guests in China and in Hong Kong, and we should really respect that. I mean, just an anecdote, I went to a lunch with a guy in China. We do business in China, and he read sort of I guess it would be an anti-Semitic book about how Jews controlled the financial system, and he'd read it, the whole cover to cover, and then he took at lunch. He was like so impressed. He thought it was the most amazing thing. He's like, I read this book about how the Jews control the financial system. How do you guys do it? And I just thought that was incredible that that was their approach. And I think it was. I had a good laugh and tried to explain it. Actually, it probably wasn't true.
I actually bought that book. It's in Chinese. I tried to learn something from it. It was at the airport in Chengdu. But no, as most of us know who've lived in Hong Kong and China for a long time, it's the opposite here than you experience overseas. People look up to Jews and they say, "Wow, you're so smart. How do you do it? What's the secret?" And all of that. So it's really nice to be able to live in that environment. So we do feel lucky to be here and to have this environment. But I think many people don't realize that maybe it's the Jewish Historical Society, Erica and team that could enlighten us. But in Shanghai and Harbin and even Tianjin, the number of Jews that were living there was incredible. You're talking 40, 50, 60,000 people in each city, which was a sizable community by any standards. Hong Kong, we were small, and then we got an influx from all these people, from all these places with families that are sitting around here, plus others. But that was a significant influence. So when you go to Shanghai and you meet people, they look up to Jewish people because Jewish people lived there before, and they interacted with them, and they had positive experiences with them. Happened to be that most of the families were poor refugees, but still they had a positive attitude, and they made things work, and they built their communities, they built their synagogues, they built their mikvahs, and they built their hotels. But it's very nice to be able to experience that.
Just bouncing off what Dan was saying in China, actually 2 or 3 weeks ago I was speaking at a succession planning conference, and it was basically the Invest Hong Kong had brought some family offices from China, and the entire audience was mainland Chinese, and the representative from Invest Hong Kong, it was hilarious. I was there meeting the guests coming in the room, and the way she introduced me was in Mandarin. Here's our Jewish speaker, and I found that hilarious. One after the other, they were shaking hands with our honorable or trophy Jew, and it was obviously if that happened in Europe, it would be anti-Semitic, but here it was positive. So I think that's an interesting story.
So, when all of your parents, when your kids, are there things that your kids talk to you about regarding the Jewish community here in Hong Kong that you're like, I have never heard of this before, we did not have this when I was growing up? I saw Dan.
I think they just have a very different perspective of the Jewish community. There's just a lot more on offer here. We were talking about the sort of structure of the synagogue downstairs. The resources that the community has now is completely different because of this building and the trust having money. That we have a community center, events and support, whereas when we were kids it was much more volunteer. There were no really paid people, so it was parents volunteering and a lot of activities like games out in the tennis court and kicking around footballs, and actually quite a lot of times parents just leaving us to do whatever we wanted. So it was a very different environment, just a much simpler environment, and I think our kids just have a completely different expectation. If they come to shul and the lunch isn't great, they probably think, hey, what's going on? Whereas we were lucky if we got a free drink. Yeah, exactly.
And just to add to that, I don't want to sound like a dinosaur, but
well, it's one of the people older than Phil.
Well, no. But at my bar mitzvah, and like I think most of us that had bar mitzvahs back in the day, there was no air conditioning in Ohalei Synagogue, so attendance was much lower than. So Rabbi Ozer should be very happy that there's air conditioning. Greatest invention. So I mean,
if you're going to say it, you have to use the mic.
There was no air conditioning. So yes, attendance was much lower. It didn't look like it looks now. It was painted all white. So everything was painted over in white and a bit of blue. And then, luckily the trustees 20, 30 years ago got together and did the deal to build this community center, sold the land, which originally this land was the JRC, Jewish Recreation Club, which was a broken down old building, and this was a mud car park. So when it would rain in the summer, you'd have to get out of your car and wade through the mud to get to the JRC. So it was very different. And then the deal was done to sell the land, build this building, build the JCC, the Jewish Community Center. We don't recreate anymore.
What do you think this is?
The JCC.
No, this is recreation.
Okay, yes. And then we became one of the wealthiest Jewish communities in the world because of all of that, what came from that deal, which really changed things. And as Dan was saying, for our kids, I think it's night and day what they have now. They have Jewish school, with Carmel School, whatever they need, kosher food, activities, so many activities you don't have time to go to all of them. So it's totally different, and it's very enriching now.
Well, further to what they said, especially because you mentioned kids, really the biggest difference starts and ends with the school, with Carmel School and the amazing job the school has done growing. When I look at my children, I think Dan had the experience, you had the same experience, Phil, you had the same experience. We were maybe one or maybe two Jewish kids in our grades at school. Yeah, was there another one? No? Dan was here above me. It's now that we're counting, thanks Phil. And I wouldn't say, because we just said there's no anti-Semitism in Hong Kong, but I wouldn't say we weren't proudly Jewish. I was very proudly Jewish. But by the same token, you're a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old kid, you don't want to be different. Okay? So you kind of want to blend in, you're there, you're not proud of it, you're proud of it, but you kind of think, oh, why don't you eat bacon? Why aren't you eating this? Oh, no cheeseburger. You know, that's where it manifests itself. Sorry, why can't you come to the disco on Friday night? All right? This type of thing. And then the biggest change I've seen in my kids from how I grew up is with the school, they have such a sense of pride in being Jewish and who they are. And at the same time, an acceptance of where they are, that they are in Hong Kong, and that it is unique. But they're perfectly at ease doing a Mandarin class and then having to go to assembly, standing up and saying a tikva. Right? That's it. And they are so relaxed with who they are and what they are, and proud. And proud of it. Think nothing of it. Would think nothing of wearing a kippah on the MTR. Would think nothing of running around the 7 Stadium with an Israeli flag. It's amazing. It's an opportunity that I never had here when I was growing up, and for obvious reasons, and I think the other guys did. And I think that it's something that has really changed the community for the better.
I think what really has also changed, at least from what I remember, is the synagogue. For some reason, I had this feeling or this recollection that when I was a child, 10 years old, pre-bar mitzvah, even post-bar mitzvah, there was a very intimidating setting. Very strange. I always had that feeling, and I think it might have been the rabbis at that time. It might have been the fact that it was the synagogue of the time, and generally religion of the time. I think we've become a little bit more modern, a lot more welcoming. My kids come to synagogue when I do, and they don't feel at all intimidated. There's the playground just next door. The kids feel that it's part of a Saturday, whereas when I used to go as a young child, I really felt that it was a bit intimidating. So I think things have changed, and that's great for the community. So that's my few cents. Yeah, we have a candy man. Chaim, he always brings candy for the children.
Sir, do you want to share that with the class?
Oh no, we always had a candy man. It was Mr. Weiss. But Mr. Weiss had a packet of Smarties, and he used to pour one out into his dirty hand, and you were kind of like, I really want that Smartie.
For those Americans in the audience, he's talking about something that's more like an M&M, not the Smartie that I'm familiar with. Yeah, thank you. So when I was a relative newcomer to Hong Kong, I was a bit unlucky because I moved right before the pandemic. But under normal circumstances, the first thing I do when I move somewhere is try to find a Jewish community, try to find a way to get involved. So for somebody who comes here like I did, who's single, who doesn't have children, who may not want to attend an Orthodox community, how do we get those people, how do we make them feel welcome?
Okay. Well, the great thing about Hong Kong is there's lots of choice. There's lots of Jewish choice. You have modern Orthodox, you have a few different modern Orthodox congregations that you can choose from, big and regal, or small and Jiddish. You have UJC as well, which is the Reform movement, which is in the same building here. You have Kowloon, you have Sephardi shul in Kowloon as well, Chabad shul there. So you really have the choice. And from what I've seen, and what I've tried to do as a member here, whenever there's someone new in town, I try and reach out and invite them over for a Friday night dinner, or somehow be nice. which is different than I think other communities. I went to New York I was there during Simchat Torah last year in the Upper West Side, and I didn't feel welcome at all, and that was at a Chabad house. So, I think the community itself is just open and welcoming. How could we do better? I think we could always do better, and we just had the ManCom Management Committee AGM downstairs, and I think that's part of how to outreach and make people feel welcome, new members, new people coming to Hong Kong, even people that are in Hong Kong that are not affiliated that would like to somehow be involved. It doesn't have to be religious, but somehow just connect with the community.
I think I saw you nodding your head, so.
I don't know if I was, but anyway, I think one of the things we've got is the JCC, right? I think that's really important. I think having a community centre for Jews of every, congregation or whatever affiliation is really important. And we could probably do a better job, which we do talk about, of making the community centre a resource for Jews in Hong Kong. So, amazing that we've got all these facilities. We can eat kosher. We can have events here. It's all actually very reasonably priced in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And I kind of think, unfortunately, people have just got a bit used to it, maybe take it a bit for granted, but there's a lot here. So.
All right, so I'm going to do one for the group. I'll start here with Joe because the mic is closer. What would you like to see in the Hong Kong Jewish community in 10 years?
Peace, love, and happiness. Goodwill amongst men.
I meant what's not already here.
With the Mark 6. Okay. I touched on it before. It's been a bit of a journey for me. I'll be honest, I'm a big fan of the school. I think from when I grew up, the JRC at the time, should I be talking quicker, Erica? No problem, 5 minutes? No problem? I can get it through this. Okay. The JRC was the center for the same reasons we just talked about. It was welcoming. There was a Sunday school. This is where everyone met, where everyone who'd been in that situation before. Today, because there is more choice, I personally feel the school is really the one institution today that really brings everybody together. So what I would like to see in 10 years is the school to grow. Now, with the school growing, the school also has an international stream. So then the international stream can accordingly grow. And then we become a true international school, a true Hong Kong institution, just like GSIS is today, just like HKIS, Island School, the ESF schools are. So that becomes the positivity, and then going on to their experiences with Chinese wanting to know more about Judaism and why are you so smart, that type of thing, that cachet will help us, and the school can be the focal point, the interface between the broader community and the Jewish community. And that's what I hope to see in 10 years.
What I hope is that Hong Kong becomes the go-to place for Jews that want to live in Asia. The resources and the opportunity for Jewish life in Hong Kong outstrips anywhere in Asia, and I think it would be amazing if we can continue with the momentum we've got, and then people actually come for opportunities to Hong Kong because we have Jewish life here. And I think that's the opportunity we can provide for these guys. And I think that's a reality, We've got school, community center, wonderful, welcoming group of, Jewish families. And actually, I think Jews can contribute to Hong Kong's future. So I think that would be terrific.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with both of my colleagues here. Well said. Besides the school and continued flourishing of the Hong Kong Jewish community as the center of Jewish life in Asia, I think a Jewish hospital would be great. I was born in Montreal at the Jewish General Hospital, and there's lots of good Jewish doctors, and it's good good career opportunities for our kids, right? It doesn't have to be a hospital. It could be a clinic. It could be Israeli as well. But somehow, I think that would be a nice thing 10 years from now, and that would further cement Hong Kong as a center, in Asia, and also the Jewish community as a center in Asia.
Oh, now you get 2 mics.
The point about Jewish hospital is not a bad one, because I was born in the Canossa, and as we all know, it's a Christian hospital, and the Mohel came for what he had to come for, and he saw this cross on the wall, and he says, well, he says to the nurse, can you go outside and get something? Covers the cross, does his thing, and takes the cloth off. So, I think not a bad idea. But jumping back to the question, obviously it's a hope. We've seen the last 4 years that Hong Kong is unfortunately quite transitory, and that's a bit unfortunate, because Hong Kong has so much more to offer the longer you're here. And obviously the wish from my side, from the family, is that as time goes by, we are able to attract more long-term families. Because at the end of the day, having just a handful or 2 handful families that stay across generations is not going to ensure the continuity of the Jewish community. So somehow, and I think the school is one way, and there are other ways, we have to find the right ingredients to keep Jews from transiting and have them stay here and see really what it's all about.
Well said. Thank you. Well, thanks, guys. I would like to open it up to some questions from the audience, if anybody has any. Don't be shy, we're Jews, we talk.
And then pass it to
So I agree that the big challenge is Jewish continuity. And Jonathan, you said earlier that at root of the transience is the cost of the city. And the commonality between the 4 of you, and we could add others if we could easily expand this, and who are the people who've been here a long time? It's people who've have a business here. You don't see 3 generations of lawyers up here or 3 generations of doctors. You see 3 generations of businessmen. What's really unique in this community is you started in many ways by other business people who came out here from particularly the Middle East, like the Sassoon, for example, who brought out family members, who brought people from the community. Do you see as yourselves as multi-generational family businesses any duty to hire Jewish people to ensure the continuity of the community? Do you think you could do more rather than maybe you feel that you need to hire more local people or more mainland people, but do you think you need to hire more Jewish people?
Thank you, Alan, for your question. Well, for us, we're equal opportunity employers.
Are you getting that? Did everybody hear that?
We have hired some Jews before, and they happen to be religious. We had to come up with a new leave policy, right? So it's called religious leave that you can apply for. But no, it's a very good point. It's kind of our unofficial policy that if there's someone smart and needs a job, we will definitely give them a go and see if it can work. It does get a bit complicated being a small community, so you have to kind of balance it. But I think definitely a fair point.
Alan, Jews are too expensive. Who can run a business hiring Jews? Partner, maybe. Yeah, that's all right. But come on. Look, if anybody can sew, they've got the job.
I do think it's a fair point that that our families are multi-generational because they've created opportunities for us to be here. I mean, that's a fair point. And that is really the challenge of people that want to make a long-term future in Hong Kong. If you come here as a professional and your career ends, how do you create the opportunity for the next generation? And that's quite real. But I think that's also one of the reasons why the multi-generational families try to contribute back to the community, because we are, we're lucky, right? So we try and, we've all kind of agreed that with the opportunity we've got, we'd like to give back to the community with our, in ways that we can, because we are lucky,
Okay, thanks, Eric. Fascinating. I want to follow up on something Phil said earlier about the past 4 years have been a little difficult, which we all know, not just here, and it's affected the Jewish community in a big way. You can tell by the car park and other things, and the kosher market, and the lack of people there. People are coming back, but it had a big impact on our community and others. Phil sort of answered part of it, but what are some of the lessons learned, do you think, from this going forward, and how does it affect some of the things that you've said about your hopes for Hong Kong and the Jewish community in the next few years? Anyone?
No more pandemics. That's what I learned.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
I think we've obviously learned how, no matter how strong we feel we are as a community, and I think we were feeling that in 15, 16, at the end of the day, we're also frail. And having things like the school, making sure that continues, having the cemetery in the state that it's in, beautiful, having, all the various aspects of our community work together, be, cross community, UJC, Chabad, have we're only as strong as we are together. And I think definitely what we've learned is that we hope there won't be another pandemic, but we also know that we're actually quite fragile as a community, and we should learn from that. I think sometimes we're a little bit too arrogant. As Dan was saying, we sometimes we feel that things are just great, and we take it for granted, and we shouldn't do that at all. I think that's what we've learned.
Yeah, just to echo on the fragility, because that was the same word that I had. We learned that the community is fragile, but I think every community is fragile in a way. I was born in Montreal. I didn't grow up there, but I can see that all the people I went to summer camp with there, they've left. They went to Toronto, Vancouver, America, some to Hong Kong. But every community is fragile, and in Hong Kong, because the Jewish community kind of lives in a kind of bubble, right? It's another expat group, and it lives in a somewhat expat bubble. There's quite a lack of understanding, I think, of where Hong Kong is going in terms of policy and government, and where the Chinese government, the central government, is trying to steer Hong Kong and the country. So I think a deeper understanding of that, and maybe it's leadership that needs to take some initiative to enhance that understanding between the community, the Hong Kong, and the central government. I think that also could help and prevent people from suddenly leaving when the next, not pandemic, but the next thing happens. Hopefully not anything, right? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, also for a wonderful probing question. I just wanted to carry on from where Alan sort of left off. Actually, there are. We know there's a minyan in Central, Monday through Thursday, at an office which happens to employ a number of observant Jews. And so that is a model. There was another company here also that employed a number of Jews. There are companies that do that. One of these companies has a young man who's doing an internship this summer in Hong Kong. He was at the Minyan this morning. So that is a model that was practiced by the Sassoons and by others who brought Jewish people out here, looked to hire Jewish people, and it really strengthened the community back then. And I think there are contemporary examples of that in the community today, where there's more than one firm that hires that has hires who happen to be Jewish, and it's really a beautiful thing to see. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Maybe it's a business opportunity, a business shidduch recruitment agency.
Ooh, next program, I love it. One in the back here.
Sorry guys, a little bit of a somber question, I guess, because everyone is multi-generational. 3 out of the 4 came from mainland China. Have you given any thought to what it might mean if you had to leave Hong Kong and where you might go? Because that's obviously a decision that my ancestors made out of Europe, obviously almost 1 or 2 generations separated leaving China. I'm not going to ask what's it going to take, but have you thought about this as families?
I mean, I think everyone thinks about it because it's a reality, and Jewish families have had to do it periodically, right? But, I think that it depends whether you feel strong about the politics. We've, as a family, have tried not to take a view on politics in Hong Kong and complicate our lives, But if you have a strong viewpoint on the politics, it may drive you out. But I don't think that we're going to leave Hong Kong because of safety. Hong Kong's one of the safest cities in the world, really. And so we feel quite safe, and we feel the business community is well taken care of. It's to be frank, the taxes are low, the business is good. So we wouldn't have a reason to leave unless we felt we weren't protected as Jews, which I don't really think is going to be happening. I think the bigger question is, which I think was, touched upon, is whether or not our next generation will have the same opportunities we have. And I think that's a much broader question. Hong Kong's a different city now. It's a much bigger, more competitive city. When I grew up in the 70s and 80s, people came here because sometimes they didn't do well in bigger places, and they came to Hong Kong because it was easier. Now, Hong Kong's often more difficult. So I think for the next generation, it's, if you bring them into a family company, that's a separate decision. Will they contribute, or are you just giving them an opportunity to live here, or will they be able to compete in a very competitive environment? So it'll be interesting to see the next generation whether or not they decide Hong Kong has the same opportunities.
Questions, or
I think Phil's going to win on this one.
oh, great. Oh, sorry.
No. So I think if you look down the road, I think the most important thing is that we all have backups, right? And I think you don't approach anything in life without a backup. So whether it's Hong Kong you're living in, New York you're living in, London you're living in, there is always going to be the thought of a backup. I think that's just normal human nature, and probably a Jewish nature. So from our perspective, there will always be a backup, whether we're here, whether the politics are good, bad, and whatnot. I think the key point, and this is what Dan was referring to, is safety. At least from our family's perspective, the biggest freedom one can ask for, hope for, wish for, is being safe. That's the biggest freedom. I mean, yes, we can talk about all the politics, about freedom of speech and all these other things, which we're not going to talk about. But at the end of the day, freedom is safety is the biggest freedom. And so from I think many of us, our children are walking around through the streets, having no issue. And I think that's probably an answer to Daniel. At this point in time, when we look at the world, Hong Kong's pretty safe and free.
All right, well, we are safe and free to give a round of applause to our wonderful panel.
And also to Lily, because that was really, really well. Society mailing list, please see me and make sure that you put your names on our mailing list so you can hear about our future events. This is our last one of the season, so I thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you everyone.